Outrageous new report from a congressional committee reveals just how far the nation's top meat producers went to deceive the public, skirting COVID restrictions and putting the country possibly at risk. The investigation finds companies like Smithfield and Tyson lobbied the Trump administration to keep their plants open through the height of the pandemic in 2020. How? By misrepresenting the health risks to its workers and warning about a meat shortage that wasn't, it seemed, actually happening. Tyson even took out a full-page ad in several newspapers calling their company, quote, as essential as healthcare. Well, by the end of that same year, at least 269 meatpacking workers would die of COVID, and nearly 60,000 would contract the virus. Joining me now is Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi. He's a member of the COVID Select Committee that's issued today's report. Congressman, I'm glad you're here. I know there's a lot of focus on the committees involving January 6th, but to me, this is a ginormous story. It's one in which you have to really think about what was at stake and the calculated risks that were taken on behalf of employees of industries that we know as a nation we rely on. But could it really be that we were duped into thinking that there were going to be shortages as a way to just keep the plants open?
Well, it seems that way. Basically what happened was the meat industry claimed that there was a shortage of meat for domestic consumption, but at the same time, they were saying that the CEOs of these companies were saying there was more than enough meat to export to other countries. And of course, those two statements can't be reconciled very well, but you're absolutely right. Meat industry executives also knew that there was a huge risk of outbreaks of infections in their factories. Secondly, the USDA knew about this as well, and they turned a blind eye. And then third, and this is perhaps the most shocking thing, they were able to get the Trump administration to issue an executive order to shield them from any oversight, especially from what the industry executives called pesky local and state health authorities, who were slowly trying to provide more oversight of these outbreaks. And they were able to get workers to stay on the job and to shield themselves from any liability associated with worker conditions.
I think that last part is so important, the idea of anticipating that there would likely be infections and deaths and the way to shield from liability. But I do wonder, thinking about the Trump administration in particular, in any administration, you're going to be relying on those who have the expertise and in whose wheelhouse these areas fall. So was the Trump administration somehow wrong to rely on what was being said, or was it the actual companies and corporations and their legal teams who misled the Trump administration into believing that this was an executive order that needed to be actually implemented?
Well, actually, what they ended up doing was that these industry executives were able to go to the political appointees at the Trump administration in the agency with jurisdiction, namely the USDA, the Department of Agriculture, and essentially get them to override and sideline the career public health officials who would otherwise make decisions about worker safety. Ironically enough, the Undersecretary for Worker Safety at the USDA was precisely the person who tried to shield these companies from liability and oversight with regard to worker conditions.
And on the worker conditions, we're talking about in these meatpacking processing plants, the definition many times of a super spreading event, the idea of close proximity, the idea of rates of infection, the transmissibility factors all there. I remember back in April of 2020 when many people were going out trying to get as much meat as they could, or things that could freeze if they had the capacity to do so, dry goods, because there was an expectation, much like maybe toilet paper or Clorox wipes and the like, and hand sanitizer, it was going to be gone. And then what do you do? And so if there really was never going to be a shortage there, I wonder, Congressman, what can be done about it? Because if they've gone to great lengths to try to shield from liability, what is the intention now that a congressional committee is going to do something about this?
Well, we're continuing the investigation, and if there are any violations of the law, we're going to refer them to the proper authorities to prosecute. But there's another aspect of this that I wanted to just bring to your attention, which is we've also started a separate investigation with regard to the prices that have gone up and up with regard to meat. Basically, meat prices have gone up by double digits, upwards of 20% in many cases for most consumers. And yet, although input costs or the cost of doing business for these meatpacking companies has gone up somewhat, they have enjoyed net income growth of 500% over the last couple of years. And so basically the bottom line is they were ignoring worker safety conditions. They were making all these false claims about a shortage of meat and so forth in the pursuit of profits. And those profits were huge. And it's partly an outgrowth of their influence with the Trump administration, but also their market power, given that basically 4 companies control the vast majority of the meat processing industry.
Congressman Krishnamoorthi, thank you. We'll follow this.